Welcome to the Explore the Northeast countdown list of the top 10 towns, not cities, to visit in Massachusetts. In this state, all land is incorporated into either towns or cities, so for this list, we will only be counting the towns, and not cities like Boston or Worcester, or even smaller cities like Northampton or Newburyport. There are 292 non-city towns in the Commonwealth, and I've been to 100 of them. And some of these picks will be super obvious. Massachusetts is known as a touristy place, especially in the eastern end, and somewhat the western end. And most places on this list will be from those areas. And to be clear, there are no metrics to this list whatsoever. I'm just picking my favorites and trying to convince you to agree and visit them for yourselves. So let's get started and begin with number 10. We start in a suburb of Boston, in Wakefield. Now, many of the Boston suburbs look kind of similar. I made a recent video on these, but I got more footage since. Most of these towns have dense commercial downtowns on a main street, and the rest of the town branches out triangularly, making navigation quite difficult, especially in Boston itself. But that also results in the center of most towns having a nice cozy town green. I made a video covering those too a few years ago, but overall, it's pretty easy to tell if you're in a New England town based on just seeing the layout. Now, what makes Wakefield different from all the other Boston suburbs like this is that Wakefield incorporates a lake very nicely into its layout. There are 3 lakefront parks on Lake Quannapowitt, 2 of which are in the center of town, and it's all really well incorporated into some of the central residential neighborhoods, which gradually shift into the downtown. These parks make the lake seem bigger and more significant than it actually is, especially in a region of the northeastern US that doesn't really have any major natural lakes. So it's nice and different from everything else. It's 10 miles north of downtown Boston, so it's close by, but not completely overshadowed. And it's not too far from other parts of Massachusetts, like the Merrimack Valley either. So I'm glad to give this town a shout out. Plymouth is a coastal town south of Boston, situated on the Plymouth Harbor, right near the outlet of the Cape Cod Bay. I know you've all heard the name, especially because of Plymouth Rock, the final landing spot of the Mayflower. You can go to the spot yourself. There's a large monument, and supposedly a rock. And of course, there's the site of the first Pilgrim colony, the history of the first Thanksgiving, and there are museums pertaining to the colony and the native tribes that were here. Downtown is very packed with businesses, and there are 3 harborfront parks in town, as well as the nice Brewster Gardens right in the center of downtown. However, the town line stretches far south, nearly to the Cape Cod Canal, but visitors are generally going to the historic parts of town, to the north, which is where I assume you'll be going when you visit. We now head to the Berkshires region of western Massachusetts. This mountainy region has numerous tourist areas and charming towns. Pittsfield is the major city of the area. But as for towns, the other major anchor is the southern part, and that is the town of Great Barrington. It's certainly a tourist hub and a crossroads in the region, although there are no major highways running nearby. It has the largest and busiest downtown in the area, and a plethora of access points to natural attractions like skiing, state park, and hiking throughout the mountains. The Housatonic River runs through town, and there is a very modest, yet existent riverwalk to add to the downtown aura. Now, the big negative here is it's on the Massachusetts side of the border, but with Connecticut-style traffic in town. Cars are just lined up on Main Street waiting for traffic lights, and it certainly detracts from the walkability of downtown. However, downtown is filled with restaurants and dessert shops and lodging and regular businesses too. The W.E.B. Du Bois Childhood Home is just southwest of downtown, and the Housatonic neighborhood is in the northern end of town, here. This place is dramatically different from the eastern end of the state, so don't forget about it when thinking of Massachusetts as a whole. We're going to one more Boston suburb that you all have heard of, Lexington, the site of the first official battle of the Revolutionary War. And nearby is the town of Concord, where the battle then proceeded to back in 1775. And that town will be an honorable mention later in this video. Now, the battle took place right on the village green. It's not like Gettysburg or other famous American battlefields with giant swaths of land or ruins or anything like that. But in total, there are many historic sites right in town. And then I would say downtown seems a little fancier than the others, or at least higher end, and things are a little more expensive. But many people pass this town to enjoy the outdoors, because it also sits on perhaps the nicest part of the Minuteman Trail, and many bikes come through in the summer. So yeah, check out the town if you're touring the area. Rockport sits on the eastern end of Cape Ann, a cape that sticks out into the Atlantic Ocean north of the Boston area, as opposed to, say, Cape Cod, which is south of Boston. Rockport is right at the end, beyond the city of Gloucester, and, as the name implies, it has a very rocky shoreline with only a couple beaches sprinkled in. It has the feel of an old fishing town, and the main part of town is rather small and quaint considering it's on the coast. However, it's still got a tourist vibe, and it culminates with Bearskin Neck, a small peninsula right downtown, which seems a lot like a tourist pier in many beach towns. It's filled with small seafood joints, gift shops, galleries, candy stores, ice cream, and other expected summer tourist businesses. There are plenty of boats in the harbor during the summer, but the rest of the town is quite empty and quiet compared to other towns like this, so it's one of the more peaceful destinations on this list, which is probably why a lot of people like it. Marblehead is number 5. It's not one of the oldest towns in Massachusetts per se, but it was a major coastal fishing town back in the colonial days, making it one of the more historic towns in the country still. And it sure feels very historic, and to modern day standards, it frankly feels like a zany town. And let me explain what I mean by that. The town sits on a peninsula, and from a zoomed out perspective, the layout is set up in an oval-shaped manner, with residential development filled in between, and then outward in a manner similar to other New England towns. But there are a ton of Easter eggs within all the development, like several nature preserves, old cemeteries, bike trails, and small parks. Then, the downtown area is spread out in a very haphazard way. I've counted out 3 distinct business districts, this one on Atlantic Avenue, this one on Pleasant Street, and then the historic one here on Washington Street. And this area has all the cool looking buildings, like the town hall, the old townhouse, and lots of old churches. And throughout this part of town, many of the houses have historical plaques on their doors, and you can explore around for hours and keep finding new interesting things. As for geography, it's also mostly on a rocky coastline, with only one beach, and there are several interesting things with the coastline too. For instance, the main peninsula has Fort Seawall and Crocker Park, which also sits along small cliffs overlooking the harbor. Then there's another small peninsula, Marblehead Neck, that has a wildlife sanctuary, the giant Castle Rock, and also the rocky Chandler Hovey Park, which has the lighthouse. There's just so much here in Marblehead, and it's so unconventional that you can cavort around all day and not get bored. And this place is very underrated. People from out of state don't know of this place as well, or at least nearly as much as the upcoming towns on this list. And even though the harbor was absolutely crowded with boats, even on the map as you can see, the town still itself wasn't too crowded. So check it out when you get a chance. And now, we would be remiss if we didn't go to Martha's Vineyard. The island is divided into 6 towns, and many people come to vacation all over the island, or even own second homes on the island. The full-time population is only around 20,000. Now, people will vacation anywhere on the island, but if you're visiting for a short while or primarily to explore, I want to highlight just a few towns for this list. Number 4 is Edgartown. Edgartown is at the southeastern end of the island, and it's actually the county seat of Dukes County, which includes Martha's Vineyard and the Elizabeth Islands to the west. Edgartown's also the largest town on the island by both area and population, and as you can see, the center of the town is quite substantial and very walkable. There's actually some semblance of a gridded street network, which is quite uncommon for Massachusetts. It's filled with tourist attractions and shops, as well as nice small hotels and inns, churches, and an art scene too. If you like beaches, well, you're in luck, as they surround the town pretty much everywhere, both along the Nantucket Sound and the open Atlantic Ocean. There are also several inland bays, which many people boat and fish both in and around. Many people also venture over to Chappaquiddick Island, which is currently connected to the rest of the island, making it not an island, but most people still simply take the ferry from downtown. Now, most of the people who visit Martha's Vineyard take the ferry from Cape Cod into Oak Bluffs, so Edgartown is a little bit of a hike from that, roughly 5 miles away. but that gives it a slightly more remote feel, even though it's not. So this is a terrific place, worth the journey to. But we will be back in Martha's Vineyard very soon on this list. And the other island, Nantucket, a world-renowned vacation destination. When you think of Nantucket, you would probably think of things like the cobblestone Main Street, the plethora of gray wood houses, the whaling history, lighthouses, beaches surrounding the entire island, and all things summer-related. Now, I know I'm opening the can of worms as to the debate as to which island is better, but it's safe to say it's a personal preference. I'd say Nantucket sure feels older, and unlike in Martha's Vineyard, there are parts of the island that are just completely deserted, with endless views of tall grass or shrubbery. Thus, it feels slightly more remote outside of downtown. Now, on this island, Nantucket is the only town, so downtown is the only major hub, right near the center of the island. There are a couple notable neighborhoods at each end of the island, with the laid-back Madaket on the western end, and the fishing community of Siasconsit on the eastern end, also known as Sconsit. That's an interesting area. It's obviously mostly expensive homes now, but the buildings are surprisingly snug and close to each other, creating a very interesting community atmosphere, even if people aren't always around in the off-season. Now, many internet sources try to discern the different kinds of people or attitudes of people on both islands, but I wouldn't worry about that. Yeah, everything's expensive, but this is an island after all, so you have to expect that. Also, this island is a little further away from the mainland than Martha's Vineyard, so the ferry ride is longer. But regardless, I hope you can go to both islands. In fact, if you have extra time, you can take a ferry from one island to the other, so have a good time. And now we head back to Martha's Vineyard, to the tourist hub of the island, Oak Bluffs. So full disclosure, I do prefer Martha's Vineyard to Nantucket, because in my opinion, there's a greater diversity of different kinds of towns and terrains. But okay, no more comparisons to Nantucket. Anyway, compared to Edgartown a few miles away, Oak Bluffs is truly a tourist town. First of all, it's where the ferry drops off and picks up most people. Then, it has piers, a carousel, the large ocean park, the very touristy Circuit Street, and a residential and hotel area circling around the southern part of downtown, filled with many interesting and colorful houses. But perhaps the most intriguing part is the gingerbread cottages at the Martha's Vineyard Camp Meeting Association, also known as Wesleyan Grove. This is a neighborhood filled with these incredible colorful cottages, culminating with the Central Tabernacle. There are still religious events there occasionally, but the cottages can be rented by anyone, and it's extremely entertaining to walk among them and see all the decorations, gardens, and people sitting around enjoying them. Now, as for the rest of the town, Oak Bluffs sits on a section of the island called the East Chop, so it's surrounded by beaches on one side and the Lagoon Pond on the other side. So the rest of the town is more like stereotypical Martha's Vineyard, but the center of town is an incredible place to visit and explore. And remember, you can easily go on to check out the other towns of the island from there, so you can't go wrong visiting, and I hope you get a chance to check it out. And now, here are 10 towns in the honorable mention list. I usually like to represent areas from all over the state on these lists, but I do have to say that many of the towns in the central or Worcester areas of the state are just less distinguishable. Please give a shout out to your favorite towns that I don't include in the comments. Just make sure they are towns and not cities. Cities will hopefully be covered in a future video. But unfortunately, none of these towns stand a chance at being the #1 town, because without any doubt, the #1 town to visit in Massachusetts is Provincetown. This shouldn't be controversial whatsoever. Provincetown is at the far outer end of Cape Cod, where it bends back to the west. Most of the area in the town is part of the Cape Cod National Seashore, and therefore is completely undeveloped dunes and wildlife. And the Province Lands Bike Trail winds roughly 7 miles throughout the dunes, the beech forest, and the ponds. There are also other walking trails through the dunes in various other parts of town, and there's also a mile-long rock jetty connecting downtown to Long Point, a former fishing community at the extreme tip of the cape where it curls around. When the community folded, all the houses were floated across the harbor to the main part of town, and now they all have special plaques on them. Some people make the 3-mile hike over to Long Point, like me, and some people kayak over, but it's pretty much a completely open beach with 2 lighthouses. There are more popular beaches to the open Atlantic Ocean to the north at Race Point Beach, as well as a beach along the Cape Cod Bay at Herring Cove Beach. And then there's beaches to the Provincetown Harbor in downtown. Now, all of this alone would make this a cool place to visit, but I haven't even talked about the civilized part yet. Everything is packed into this thin 3-mile strip along the harbor. And I do mean packed, especially along Commercial Street, right by the water. Every kind of touristy shop or boutique or restaurant you can think of is there. However, you don't have the tacky tourist attractions of larger beach towns, like boardwalks, arcades, amusement parks, or casinos. But they do have shows and live entertainment all around, both outdoors and indoors. And towering over everything is the iconic Pilgrim Monument, which you can pay to climb up and see the surroundings. But even with all the amazing things in town, perhaps the biggest charm of all is the people. There is undoubtedly a gigantic cast of characters of all kinds in town. Beachgoers, artists, performers, cyclists, walkers, families, everything. This town is well known for being a haven for the LGBT community, and there are many events and attractions dedicated to them. About 15 years ago, I had the chance to go to their big annual Pride Festival in late August, and it was an absolute blast for everyone, and it was certainly family friendly. In conclusion, there is no place in the US like this. Provincetown is truly one of a kind, and you have no excuse to not go and check it out, especially if you're already at the Massachusetts coast. It is a lengthy drive, and it is hard to park, and I'm not revealing my secret free parking spot. But if driving's a problem, you can fly there or take a ferry from Boston or Plymouth. But the trip is 100% worth it. You don't need to fly halfway across the world to experience a paradise right here in your backyard. So there you have it, the top 10 non-city towns to visit in Massachusetts. Let me know in the comments your 10 favorite towns to visit in the Commonwealth, and check out my other ranking videos if you enjoyed this. Moving forward, there will be more videos like this with commentary and rankings, since they seem to attract the largest audience. So stay tuned for more content. Thanks for watching.